Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I'm Ethan Lane Miller, and joining me today are
Barack Malkin.
RDY.
Yeah. I have been very excited to cover this topic. I jumped at the opportunity when I realized when this recording was, going to happen. So for our listeners, we're recording on September 2nd, 2024. And I'm just going to kind of jump on in if that's okay with y'all.
I guess so. Can you wait a little bit, maybe?
How about now?
Great, let's do it.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit by framing it from the Jewish perspective. And so I pulled a quote from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 7 and 8. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Eternal shall be your rear guard.
Okay, I have two problems.
Okay.
One, I, for some reason, was looking at the first two verses of the chapter instead of these two verses. So I've been going crazy thinking about like Banshee or Star Trek, the search for Spock and all this stuff that could be in Ethan's mind. And now I was on the wrong verses, so I have to start all over.
Oh, no.
Oh, I know what this is now.
What is it,
Okay,
Barack?
it's only because I was like, what is he talking about the date? And it's an Ethan episode. And here. I'm making a guess.
I think Barack's got it, but let's see.
I don't know enough about it, but purely because of what social media told me 2 days ago. Yeah, he's nodding his head. 2 days ago was the date that Bashir and somebody else,
Cisco and Dax,
okay, I was way off, went back in time and landed on August 30th, 2024. And it was right before some major event was going to happen. And that's all I remember. So just purely because this text, I was like, what is we talking about? And I still don't grasp the concept of the text. So I'm looking forward to diving into what that meant, what those two verses mean. But that's my guess.
Well,
RDY, anything to comment?
I think I'm going to be quiet this episode.
Great.
I don't know who those people are.
So Barack, I will say that you are on target, but let me back up and explain a little bit of what's going on here. So what's going on is that in the world of Star Trek, in the year 2024, most cities in the United States have established something called a sanctuary district. And a lot of this comes from Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki. And these districts were originally established as places for people who didn't have a job, didn't have a home, or both. And there's a promise made that the government would, provide this free housing and also provide social services to help residents find jobs. And at first, people entered these districts voluntarily, but conditions quickly deteriorated and jobs never materialized. And so there was overcrowding. There weren't enough resources allocated for folks to find jobs. And then the government started forcefully relocating people into these districts. And this included relocating people who were homeless and or jobless, but also had obvious underlying issues like mental health challenges or substance abuse. And I specifically pulled this quote from Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, that said, laws prohibiting sleeping on the streets were further used to justify the forceful relocation of residents into the sanctuary. So that's the first background. So in this episode, the characters of Cisco, Bashir, and Dax, through, of course, a transporter accident, end up traveling back in time to the year 2024 and experience a pivotal moment in human history, the Bell Riots, that are, as I look at my watch, taking place right now in San Francisco. Y'all saw it on the news, right? It's all over the news.
Can we back up both for RDY's sister and for RDY? Can you explain what show you're talking about? And
sure.
perhaps like if you have the name of the episode or something, but
Yeah,
Do the
so
Bell
this
Riots
is
have anything to do with my daughter Bella?
she
Who
in
knows?
San
It's a
Francisco?
riot.
Is she in San
She's in Chicago, but
Oh,
she's a
then no. Then no. So this is a two-part episode from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, past tense parts 1 and 2. So the story goes that, and I'll go pretty quickly this, we can start diving into it a little bit, but that on September 1st, 2024, the residents of Sanctuary District A in San Francisco, led by a man named Gabriel Bell, took over an administrative processing center, held 6 employees hostage, and kind of broadcast to the internet the terrible conditions that took place inside the sanctuary. In the episode, of course, it's Star Trek and time travel. So what happens in reality is Gabriel Bell ends up accidentally getting killed, and Cisco has to step into his place. And they're balancing, like, how do we not contaminate the timeline? And they know that by the end of the riot, Gabriel Bell dies, and now Cisco has to take his place. And it's a wonderful lens into how do we analyze and look at humanity, knowing that we're sitting here now in 2024 during the time period of the Bell Riots. And this episode that came out 30 years ago is still scarily relevant to what's going on today. There was an article on StarTrek.com where the author, and this is in 2019, Sean Kelly, wrote that these episodes have important lessons for Americans and their president, specifically addresses a policy from the administration at that time that said that there were rumors that they were looking to address homelessness on the West Coast, rounding up unhoused people and placing them into camps. Sounds a little scary, but even scarier, DVD commentary from this episode says, as the episode was finishing production, an article appeared in the LA Times describing a proposal by then Mayor Richard Radorin to create fenced-in havens for the city's homeless to make downtown Los Angeles more desirable for businesses. The cast and crew were shocked that this was essentially the same scenario that past tense warned might happen in 3 decades, but now is being seriously proposed in the present.
This is great. I really enjoy when these weird similarities happen between past pop culture and current events, and everybody's like, that's like the same thing. How did we predict this? Who's the crazy? Like, Simpsons gets it all the time. I really loved recently, there was a video interview of Terry Crews asking him about when he was in the movie Idiocracy as a pro wrestler president who ripped his shirt off at like the convention election situation, and then the Hulk did that recently, and Terry Crews like was with friends and like, did that? Like, I did that in the movie, and this is happening in real life. It's just really funny when these things happen. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is. And so I've go ahead.
There are only 6 plots in any storytelling scenario, and art imitates life and life imitates art, and humanity doesn't change, only technology changes.
So it's not a secret that I, Ethan Lane Miller, love science fiction that is values-based and addresses and tackles social problems head on. And so I'm curious, my 2 co-hosts, do you have a favorite franchise or thing from nerd culture that deals with moral issues?
Comic books.
Is there a particular genre or
you
line
can't
of
take
comic
the
books?
cheat there. He said franchise.
We were talking before recording the previous episode about X-Men 97, and so that's kind of in the forefront of my mind right now. The idea of the X-Men in general being hated and feared by a world they're sworn to protect has always been, to me, what, seeking justice is all about, and, fighting for what's right. This quote from Isaiah 58, I actually used in a Yom Kippur sermon years and years ago. These things that you read all as one, sharing your bread with the hungry, taking the wretched poor into your home, when you see the naked, clothe them. I had different people throughout the sanctuary with one line each, and they like shouted these things. So I really think that the message from Isaiah here is just ubiquitous throughout any story that would have justice as its theme.
I'll say that it's sometimes hard to find franchises or properties that really steer away from violence in order to figure out morality. When I play D&D with my little kids, I homebrew and create storylines that have no combat. It's all either competition based or moral decisions that they have to do. There's no fighting and killing monsters or people that we don't know. So, in that same vein, I think I would say
So you
that.
only kill people you know?
So, I might say that the property I think that I enjoy most in dealing with morality would be Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, as a teenager, doesn't have this innate want to kill the bad guy. And the MCU gets this really well. He is constantly like, well, what's going on, man? Like, let's talk, can't we? And he's so verbal because he doesn't want to fight, and he has these incredible powers that making him this super being, and yet he doesn't over abuse them to the point of, he learned his lesson the first time and doesn't want people to die. That every time he fights a bad guy, it's about helping them and guiding them towards, quote, the light, whatever that might be in that moment for that storyline. But he always strays more towards moral decisions and further away from physical confrontation, even though it often happens. It's more of a defensive mechanism for him.
I think Superman is the same way.
Mm.
The trying not to lie, trying to like hold back all the time, that how easy it would be for him to crush anyone he touches, and having to be just thoughtful at every moment of every interaction.
Yeah, it's one of the many reasons I enjoy Star Trek. There's plenty of episodes you got to phaser the bad guys, but also so many episodes are centered around like, how do we understand them so then they can understand us? Mm-hmm. And it's about conversations.
Yeah. Can I ask, I'd love to just go back to the quote again. As I said, I read it. I don't fully comprehend the definition or the purpose.
So that's great, because I was going back there right now.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So kind of the next question I have pulls us right back to this quote. And it's the idea of, this feels like a great example of good ideas gone wrong. And it's not that hard for me to imagine, that something like this could have been used or this quote rather, could have been used in a hypothetical universe. We're creating these free homes for people in cities across America. As I was researching, what Jewish quote I wanted to use for this topic, I came across a list of quotes from Mazon, which is a Jewish nonprofit that directly deals with fighting hunger. And this was the second quote on a many 6 pages long of quotes, they say, that demonstrate Judaism's commitment to caring for the poor and hungry. And so that's kind of where I started to pull in this quote and this idea that, like, I also think in a lot of different sci-fi and fantasy franchises, as well as in reality, the statement goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so that's where I began to pull in this quote, because it feels like you would be operating from this idea, how wonderful to give people this free place to live, but we really botched the execution here. And so one of the questions I have also is, where else, and I think there's a lot of places in sci-fi and fantasy where we can see wonderful, great ideas that end up going very terribly wrong, or even we hear the justifications and the reason behind it, and we wonder, how do we let it get to this point? So I feel like that was also one of the points of this episode, is we start from this wonderful place and this wonderful idea and end up running ghettos and concentration camps for the homeless.
There's also, the lead in to this quote is is this the fast I desire section of Isaiah? Is this really what I want you to do? Do I want you to starve? Do I want you to bow down and, dress yourself up as good mourners, but not do anything in the world? No, I want you to do things in the world. I want you to be an active participant in bringing justice. And that method, how we bring about justice, is such a fine line, because we have a prison system that is, in its intention, to keep bad actors off the streets, but in its application is perpetuating this cycle of violence through people who get trained to do more crimes when they're all gathered in prisons and being treated inhumanely and not what it was intended.
I appreciate this has been very helpful in me understanding what this text is trying to say. And I think I'll say that we see this a lot in media, books, film, TV, etc. Of somebody thinks of a way to fix something and they do it and they have to stick by that structure. And if you veer off of that, there's going to be a problem. But the issue is that when you stick to that without flexibility, issues arise, right? That you can't just sit in one stagnant world with the rules that you created at some certain time and expect that those will still hold true in every single situation. There has to be availability to have conversation and adjust when the time is necessary. I think the problem is that, especially in today's world, people want to be able to manipulate whatever systems to benefit themselves. And so, most often, organizations or businesses or structures need to set those rigid rules in order to set parameters. And that's how you get things like, God, I don't understand how these signs happen. You ever go to a public pool somewhere and it says, like, no bowling balls in the pool? How many times did that have to happen before that hit the sign as something they needed to define as a boundary, as opposed to just once?
Once a bowling ball can cause damage to a drain. So it only has to damage a drain once for it to go up on the sign.
But there's like that's it's so specific for me, as opposed to like only pool toys. And nobody can be in court say, well, a bowling ball is technically a pool toy. Like, there's ways to get out of that. But I remember, God, I was at a Coinstar once and bowling ball was on that list. And I was like, who would put a bowling ball in a Coinstar?
I tell my children all the time that if a sign in public says don't, someone did. And you got to think about what happened.
But that's what I'm talking about, these rules and structures. Instead of figuring out a way to be flexible for the variety of situations, those organizations and structures said, just add bowling ball to the list. We're not going to talk about it. As opposed to being, what's the problem here? That we have to add this huge list of things that aren't allowed at a pool, as opposed to setting a policy that is flexible to include the things without being so convoluted that it is misunderstood.
Because and you're going to have that idiot who says, and sorry if one of our listeners is this idiot, but you're going to have that idiot who says, if I have a toy and it's in the pool, it's a pool toy.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely met people like that.
My 4x4 is definitely a toy, and I didn't have any idea of why I couldn't drive that into the pool.
Right?
You owe me a new 4x4.
No 4x4s in the pool.
Right? It feels that, so that to me is like an issue, is you set up a rule and structure, and then they're just making new rules and policies as opposed to trying to figure out what happened there to correct the system from shifting to whatever else gets added to the list moving forward. I think, and zombie movies see this all the time. Let's just shut down in this mall, this jail, this whatever, set up the fence, we'll be fine. But they don't prepare for like the mass exodus of zombies that's inevitable coming 10 miles away or whatever it is, because the fence isn't strong enough for that. But right now this is working. Nobody goes outside the fence. We build the fence, we create our gardens, it's fine, until it's not. And they're not prepared for that. And that, I think, is the issue, is just setting up the rules without figuring out what are our outs. What are the flexibility options? Let's talk about adjustments here.
We have so many mistakes in our legal system because of exactly that. And also because of the non-careful reading of the original law of the land, which was written to be flexible, to be changeable, and we don't change it because it's written down. And the same thing is true about the Talmud. I'll ask my students, what's the biggest problem with the Talmud? And I hope by the end of the year they are trained to say it was written down. Because once something is written, some people think that it's correct. And maybe it was.
That's what I love about Reform Judaism, is that we're taught to question the text, whereas not all sects of Judaism do that. ours allows us to, which so I would be thrown by your question because written down to me wouldn't mean firm. It means discussable. You now have something to point to and translate differently and explore, as opposed to, I don't remember what they said. Maybe they said this.
That's because you are a Reformed Jew. You are an educated Reformed Jew who knows that
Oh, you're too kind.
choice requires education and that you need to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So when I think of this, for some reason, I popped back to the second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie and Doc Ock that felt like such an example of great intentions with a good tool for somebody who's educated, and it just goes so far off the rails.
Right.
And you feel like, I would like to think that if I were in his shoes, I would have stopped it before it got so bad. But these stories are all over the place. It makes me pause. Like, would I? Would I?
And also, in Otto Octavius's defense in that particular film, the chip that controls the
inhibitor
arms
chip, the
function.
inhibitor.
And so it's a problem in the mechanism, not a problem with the operator until the two merge.
Right. And in that sense, it's the same thing. The rules of the arms that were leading the way just said all you have to do is contain. That's it. And we can do it. We can contain this. That's our job. That's our boundary. Let's just do that again. We can contain it without thinking, well, what happens when we can't?
Yeah. So these two episodes, they're very, very good. So the resolution to the story, and spoiler alert for a 30-year episode of Star Trek, is the Bell Riots happen. There is death, and it makes it onto the news, but it begins to push social change in America. And no surprise, Cisco and Bashir and Dax are able to return to the 24th century just fine. But the episode doesn't necessarily take a, well, here's what you should do approach. It takes a, yeah, this is bad, and we pointed it out, and change is going to happen. Interestingly, Robert Hewitt Wolf, the writer of the episodes, posted on social media this Friday and asked fans to donate in memory of Gabriel Bell, and listed off a couple of charities that support the homeless, which I thought was incredibly, incredibly cool. I've been trying to think, like, are there examples where franchises get a little direct with, here's what we should be doing instead?
A lot of times you get, including in episodes of Torah Smash, you get messages for, calling support agencies if you're sharing a similar problem.
But the difference there is we're right.
You want an example where we go too far?
I mean, maybe. No, that's a fair point.
I think the best ones are the ones that help you realize the problem isn't easily solvable, but you have to take action. Right? I remember, I think it was an episode of The Golden Girls where they were traveling somewhere and they ended up in a homeless shelter is what happened. I forget why they were there. And at the start of the night, everybody had their ideas of what this homeless shelter was, or, were told or should be. And at the end of the night, they wanted to donate and give and to help these people. And the person was like, that's very nice, but that's not going to give them what they need right now. Like, this will help for a day. And then it's this broken cycle of homelessness, like, isn't going to end just because you care and want to make sure that they have your food for dinner or a bed tonight or a bed tomorrow night. Like, this issue is more complicated than that, and everybody has a different reason for why this may be their story. And there's a lot of episodes that I think do that and tell the people watching through the characters of, if you want to make change, it's going to take more than just you, and it's going to take a lot of effort. So work hard to fix that. That these good ideas gone wrong that you're talking about are pretty solid in their infrastructure from the get-go, and try to say this is the only way to fix it. And I think so good ideas gone wrong. I think best ideas. Oh, I don't have a good one. I wish I had a good one, but I can't think of a good ending to compare to good ideas gone wrong. Best ideas, blank, blank. Listeners, let us know. But I think those are the ones that just are hard. They're really hard to get off the ground, to gain the right amount of support that you need, and the right backing and the right efforts is complicated. And there's a lot of shows that do that correctly and just say, this is going to be hard. It's not easy, but it's important. And the starfish on the beach story. For those that don't know,
I tell that at staff orientation every year.
Great. So then our listeners already know. And so
all my listeners are my camp counselors. Thank you for being here.
So like, it's that story. It's not easy. Doesn't mean you should stop.
In my previous workers, I've worked for a couple different Jewish youth serving organizations. And it's interesting when I look at how there are different approaches to social action and social justice. And there's one youth organization I worked for that I thought was very good at addressing the immediate. So very good at organizing like fundraisers to be donated to a charity, or we're going to all get together in this social hall at this Jewish organization. We're going to make sandwiches and pack lunches that'll be distributed directly to the homeless, or donate to this charity that'll directly give it out. And then another Jewish youth serving organization I thought was very good at we need to go upstream, and we need to like actually see like what's causing these problems, and how do we also stop these problems from continuing in the future? Like, how do we lobby elected officials? How do we learn about the history that's led us to this point so we can fix these mistakes? And so I've wrestled with this idea of like, both are valid and provide help and assistance. And I think for me, I feel like it's kind of striving to strike the balance between the two, where if you're just doing one, you're missing a portion of what you could be doing.
I had a realization while you were talking. This is taking us backward a couple steps, so my apologies. A real life example of knowing when to not follow the rules to the letter was when I worked with Hebrew Union College's weekly soup kitchen. So I was the quote unquote head chef of the soup kitchen my last year of school. And there was a rule that each guest got 2 cartons of milk, and that was it. And then toward the end of the night, when you had plenty of milk left over, there was this one guest who always the same person. He would go to every person on staff and he'd say, "Is there another milk? Do you got any more milk? Any milk? Any milk?" And we would all just say, "Yeah, here you go." And we would pretend that we had no idea he was going to everyone. And that was our way of following the rules, but bending them at the same time.
It's really great. I think the Golden Girls example, while not necessarily sci-fi or fantasy, I thought was a great example of when other franchises handle homelessness. I've been trying to think, are there other sci-fi, fantasy, or nerd properties that deal with homelessness? And I kind of started thinking a little bit about Battlestar Galactica, the idea that humanity has been shrunk down to about 40,000 survivors in search of a planet to call their home. And I think that was interesting. And I've had a Battlestar Galactica episode in mind for a while now that maybe I'll pull out of the dustbin. But are there other properties? Like there's the series of unfortunate events, kind of, I think, that not really on the bullseye, but somewhere on the board, I think.
In terms of what?
Just like directly, like homelessness is a central part of the theme.
Oh, because they're orphans,
yeah,
but
like trying to find a home is a very common like part of like a hero, journey of some of our heroes. But like the literal like finding shelter aspect of it,
Well, Red Hood, Jason Todd, before he met Batman, was a street kid. There's a moment in the Daredevil comics where Daredevil, he's more struggling with being, I don't know, mentally ill and dealing with himself and not kind of getting lost, and maybe schizophrenia, maybe substance abuse, but Jason Todd is the one that I really think about, that this homeless kid who was rescued by Bruce Wayne.
All the other examples I'm thinking of are very much not. They're like all white knight scenarios of you get to know one character in a movie, and by the end of the movie, the usually white main character has given that single person a job or helped them fix themselves, whatever it might be, doesn't solve the problem. And that main character doesn't then go and find another homeless person and change their life dramatically, right? They then just have a lifelong friendship with that one character. And the problem is not fixed. It's just, hey, this white knight fixed this one problem. You
Yeah,
can
it
too.
mattered
It's
to
not,
that one.
it mattered. It mattered to that one. I get it. And
It's
if
so tricky.
yes, if every single person was in a position of power and money, as those characters often are, to change another person's life, yeah, 100%. Most individuals don't have the power and money to do that,
Yeah.
right? I know a lot of people who, here's a great example. As a Jewish youth professional, since I was a participant and then for many years following as a volunteer and then as the person in charge of the youth group, we did a program called Midnight Run. And that is when you collect sheets, clothes, toiletries, food, etc., and go into the streets of New York City. There was an organization, I'm not sure if it still exists, that you would coordinate with where are the best stops and where do you need us to stop tonight. And you'd get on their schedule and they would let you know where to stop and what time they need you to be there. And they're the most populated homeless sections of New York. And so people know that Midnight Run is coming around. You let them, from Midnight Run, do you need anything? We're not changing anything. We're helping them for that moment. And I think, most moving instance in all of the years that I went is that there was a participant who was on the vehicle that we were using, helping to distribute clothes to the right people with the right size with the bags that we had so that they weren't like all over the place and people can sort of have some structure with it. And they really needed a heavy coat and they didn't have that size. The participant realized that they were that size and they gave that person the coat off of their back. And then that participant didn't have a coat for the rest of the night, but it was just that one night. This person on the street now had a coat moving forward. And they didn't change that person's life, but the participant gave what they had for the other person. And that in itself, I think, is a really hard thing for anybody to do. And that was just a coat off of their back. And I think, if anybody says to somebody, come home with me, let me share my, my home, my income, my food, my shelter, that they're already struggling to pay through debts and other things, loans, whatever, to be able to support somebody else. I think most people struggle with being able to give repeatedly in the sense to help lift a person out of poverty, right? The highest form of tzedakah is helping somebody so that they can then help themselves. Like it's a sort of perpetual motion machine of mitzvah. And that's really hard. And I think that's the idea, is that to get to that point of sustaining somebody else's well-being beyond needing you is a really hard point to get to. And so I hope people strive for that in one way or another at some point or at all points in their life. But I think what Golden Girls got right is it's hard. And I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that while movies do that, and I wish it happened, as you said, RDY, sometimes it's impossible for people. But those little things, I think, really do help make a difference in other people's lives, whether they realize it or you realize it or don't, or they don't, whatever it is. Yeah.
I want to just bolster your point for a second, just to say that the text you quoted from Maimonides about his levels of tzedakah,
Yeah.
that eighth highest level of helping a person stand on their own 2 feet, that's the best, with the worst being giving begrudgingly.
Mm-hmm.
But those two levels and everything in between are all still tzedakah. They're all
Right.
still great.
Right.
And I think you implied that, but I wanted to just say
Yeah,
it.
no, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Really, really great. As I look ahead and the time in this episode begins to wind down, I've got one, maybe two questions, depending on how quickly we go. The first one is, Star Trek has this grand tradition of making predictions about the future. And when you're in a franchise as long as Star Trek, eventually we get to live through some of that future. So we're here in 2024. Are there other franchises that you've experienced that have had great predictions of the future, or perhaps very, very, very off predictions of the future?
Sorry, Brock. Back to the Future.
Yep. I'm glad you brought that up.
Be specific. Back to the Future 2.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
And 3.
I know I mentioned it early. Idiocracy is wonderful. And it's wonderfully, terribly spot on. Here's a fun fact if you don't know. When they were making the movie Idiocracy, the costume person was looking for futuristic. Did I already mention this on an episode?
No, but I know this. Or I
Okay.
don't think so, but I know this.
I don't
God.
believe so.
All right, listeners, sorry if I've mentioned this already, but when the costume designer was looking for items, they wanted a futuristic looking shoe. And so they found a company, an unknown company, and the person was like, "Can we use these?" And the costume designer said, "Well, yeah, of course. These are like ugly and stupid. Nobody's going to wear these shoes." And so they use them, and every character in the movie wears these futuristic looking shoes because they think they will not exist in the future. And those shoes were Crocs. And there's
Love
so
that fact.
there is so much more in the movie that is insane in its correctness. It's, as much of a satire movie as it is, there is so much that is so much on the nose for that movie. So I will throw that one out. Great movie if you haven't seen it.
I want to add to Idiocracy the difficulty they have in the future with the machines that can only
Mhm.
take one answer. So if your answer is not,
Yeah.
like, what does he say his name is? Like, I don't know, or something like that.
Something like he tries to correct the machine and it gives him that trying to correct the machine as his name.
Yeah. And like, how many times have you been on a call and you're like, I don't want any of these options?
Yeah. I'm glad Terminator isn't correct
Oh, well, that's.
yet.
I was going to
Yet.
say, for that one, I count that as a well. Let's reconvene in about 5 years and we'll see how we're doing. In a couple weeks, I go to Chicago for my next round of classes with Spurtus. And one of the classes about management. And it's very interesting because one of the points, one of the segments trying to make is that, well, oftentimes when there's a failure or an issue, thinking about workplace safety, we focus on the individual rather than systems. And one of the lines that I read was, systems are all made by people. There's no system that makes itself. And all I thought was, yet. Let's give it a couple years.
There's a movie that's out now that I have not yet seen called Afraid, about an AI system that takes over the house. And that actually, I have friends who are in kind of a semi-constant fear of exactly that. And I'm very curious to talk to some of these friends in particular and see how they react to this movie, if they're even going to see it.
You should have them watch. There was a Disney movie many years ago called, I think it was called Smart House.
Smart House.
Yeah. Same concept, just not horror.
Great. One last question. We're thinking about predicting the future. Anytime I try and look up what does Judaism predict about the future, I either get things about Kabbalah or what's going to happen right before the Messiah shows up.
Mm.
Is there something I'm missing? Are there any other places Judaism really talks about the future? When I talk about Judaism, I really talk about how Judaism is not so much focused on the afterlife and it's focused on where we are now and how we're making the world a better place. And that's how I've always justified it. But I'm here and I'm asking these two folks on this screen, and now you get to hear this answer.
I think pointedly not. I think you're right that it does appear in Kabbalah. And then there was this one guy, he actually died a couple of years ago, who wrote this whole book about how the Torah predicts everything. And it's really convoluted, and I use the word logic hesitantly. And I think because of exactly what you've identified, Judaism is not concerned about the afterlife, and therefore they're not concerned about the future. It is concerned about right now. It is concerned about dealing with the starfish one at a time. It is concerned about doing the mitzvot one at a time. It is concerned about taking care of each other, person by person by person. And as such, there is a phrase that there's no early or late in the Torah. So this is, a people who teach based on the concept of, if there's no early and late in the Torah, they don't care about history. They don't care about the future. They care about now. And what are we doing now to make a difference in the world?
I think to the point we talked about earlier, and I've said how much I really enjoy being a Reformed Jew for this point of constantly questioning and evaluating and shifting to where we need to be, that you had said the only time the future shows up is talking about the Messiah. And I think as long as we don't sit in this good ideas gone wrong mentality of we have to prep for the Messiah, and that's the rule boundary that we're setting up. That's not the point, right?
Mhm.
I don't think that's the point. I think the idea is creating a world of love and kindness, and let's be flexible and shift as our understanding grows and times change and we learn more about each other and those around us. Let's continue to shape that concept and less concerned about the Messiah is the end and more of how do we treat other people. That is the future piece that I hope Judaism is. I think Judaism is focused on. We're always sort of talking about that as a concept of change, of how we can constantly treat others well. And I think that's the Jewish future that I'm always sort of listening to and looking to learn more about.
Yeah, very
Amen.
Trekian way to look at the world, from what I understand. Not for the sake of personal gain, but for the good of humanity.
Yeah.
All right. Before we wrap up, anything else about the Bell Riots, about time travel, homelessness?
I would say if there's something like Midnight Run in your area, do it. In that same vein, my wife and I do try to always keep a box of granola bars in the car, different types of granola bars or
We do that
something,
too.
so that when we pass somebody on the street and they are looking for something, that we don't often carry enough cash on us, that we'll ask if they want a granola bar or two or something and give them some food to help them out. And that doesn't fix their problem, man. It doesn't, but it might help them for a little bit and give them a little more strength for what they need to be doing. But I wish I had the money and the power to help create some change for them. And I know that I don't at this time. And so I just try to do what I can. I hope you try to do what you can too.
I took a seminar taught by Rabbi Harold Kushner years and years ago, and he spoke of one of his teachers who he would visit, and in the entryway to his teacher's home, there was a huge bowl of quarters. And he knew that his teacher had a washer and dryer in his home, so couldn't fathom what this huge bowl of quarters was for if not to go do laundry. So when asked, he said that his teacher responded by telling him he would take a handful of quarters and put them in his pocket anytime he went out on the streets of New York so that he could give a little something to everyone. So just like your granola bars, and I have granola bars in my car for the same reason, like a Costco sized box of granola bars. Anything that we can do, it's on us to complete the task, but we are not absolved from participating in it either.
And this is why I love science fiction and fantasy and nerd culture. We get to have these wonderful, deep discussions nestled in a framework of, hey, this 30-year-old episode of Star Trek seems pretty relevant. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. This episode was supported in part by Juice. Juice, which stands for the Jewish Comics Experience, is a full-day convention that brings together fans, creators, and industry professionals to explore the rich history and contributions of diverse Jewish creators and content in the comics medium. Juice is created and hosted by the Center for Jewish History in New York City and will be held this year on November 10th. If you are interested in attending or to learn more, visit juice.org. That's JEWCE.org. Also, visit the Center for Jewish History at cjh.org for new information on the institution and their partners. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And you had me at shalom. You had me at shalom. It's really good.
I was clueless.
In case you're wondering, of course, there's plenty more Star Trek to happen, but the next real date that we will live through is 2063.
Really?
Yeah.
This was the last Star Trek future date? of all the movies and all of the show episodes?
Well, think about it. A lot of the time when they travel into the past, they're typically traveling to our present day to make it
Yeah.
cheaper. But yeah, we had the Bell Riots in 2024, and then we'll have First Contact Day in 2063. So I'll reconnect with you all then. All right, we can make it.
Got a lot of time.
We can make it.